votre logo ne se voit pas très bien. Bon, en tout cas, c'est comme ça. J'ai le bon logo.
La prochaine fois, j'ai créé un fond d'écran pour portable.
Au téléphone? OK.
Oui, ouais.
OK.
Donc, voilà, les participants commencent à venir.
Mais dis donc, c'est bon.
Tu vois, dans ça?
Les participants sont connectés, monsieur Imi. Ils nous entendent.
Ah, pardon.
OK. Je pense qu'on peut commencer là. On est à 44. C'est bon, Fatma?
Donc ça, je crois que c'est bon. C'est bon, donc ça, c'est bon. J'ai trouvé.
On peut commencer.
Oui.
Super. Thank you everybody for having joined us for today's brown bag session. We'll be speaking on the transition support facility today. I'm Valerie Dabity, I'm manager in resourceabilization and partnerships. I'll be joined by Emid Kamayu, who's the Chief Fragility and Resilience Specialist, who's in the front office of RDTS, the Transition States Coordination Office. I'm going to say a couple of words to introduce the subject, then Emilia is going to take over and we'll play tag team for today's presentation. But before I do that, let me maybe just hand it over to Fatma quickly for some housekeeping issues. Fatma.
Thank you, Valerie. This session is going to be shared with all attendees, including the presentation for today. And when you need to ask your questions, please use the Q&A function as indicated in the screen instead of the chat. And also, all the audience is going to be on mute unless we have additional time left at the end. Then you can raise your hand if you need to speak, and I will give you the authorization to unmute. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Fatma. On a une question quand même concernant s'il y avait une traduction ou les services, pardon, de traduction aujourd'hui. Je pense que non, mais s'il y a un problème, on peut toujours reprendre la parole en français. On est les deux francophones, il n'y a pas de problème pour cela. S'il y a un problème, et puis après, s'il y a une question qui n'a pas été peut-être clairement auquel on n'a pas clairement répondu, on peut toujours donc contacter de manière bilatérale. OK. Before I hand over the floor to Emid, I just wanted to say a couple of words on what the TSF is. So the TSF was something that was introduced under the ADF 11 under a different name. Since that time, we're now under ADF 15. It actually has been the subject of set-asides, which is an amount of resources put aside for specifically the TSF. And the highest amount it's received has been, in fact, under ADF 15. It is an incredibly important and useful instrument. The history would have that in the beginning, it was meant to assist countries out of conflict. Then it was used principally to assist countries with clearance or arrears. And now it helps countries in regions, in fact, deal with issues of fragility. When you think about areas such as Lake Chad Basin, the Horn of Africa, G5 Sahel, you do understand that fragility is not just country specific, but can be very much impacted by the neighborhood or the region in which one is. The second thing I want to say is that the TSF is actually quite singular in the sense that it is the only instrument of its kind amongst the MDBs. And it is actually also quite flexible in that it allows earmarked contributions. Typically, trust funds, and it is a fund in a sense, funds don't allow contributions that are earmarked. So you cannot come in and say, I want to only support Mali or only support a project in Sierra Leone. But for the countries that are eligible to receive TSF financing, a donor can actually specify what use they would like to have their contributions go to. And this has actually been very helpful to us, and we'll speak about arrears clearance for both Sudan and Somalia. It's been actually very helpful to us in those two settings, as well as in other specific projects that have been done. And then finally, I just wanted to let you know that in terms of the evolution of TSF, there is an important conversation happening with the ADF deputies about how, in fact, we can treat TSF, how we can be more precise in terms of what we use as indicators to decide what types of funding a particular country will have. I think one of the very important tensions in an instrument like a TSF and why it was actually set up is that, as many of you know, your resources that are provided to a country are based on country performance. And country performance, so this is the PBA, and a country performance, a performance-based allocation. Of course, if you're a country which is fragile, you will not have a very good performance, but you will still have, I think, fairly important needs. And so the TSF was put or created to also balance out this, what I call this dilemma between countries that are poor performers because of their fragile situation, but that still do require funding to help them go from fragility to a situation which is much more stable. So I will end it there. I'll hand over the floor to Emile. We're together for about an hour today. And I should also say that this is the last Brown Bag session until September. So we thank you, all of you, for having sort of followed us during this particular sessions. And we look forward then to hosting you again when we will retake the floor in September. Thank you very much. Emile, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie, and thank you to the colleagues who have connected for this conversation today. And I also want to thank you for this broad overview of the TSF. As we all know, the TSF is that financial, instrument that we use to, address the drivers of fragility on the continent, and also to build resilience. But before we get to that point, it's actually important for us to understand the bank's strategic and operational approach to addressing fragility and building resilience. Now, for us to get into that point, we need, first of all, to understand the guiding principles for working in fragilities. So let me walk you through some of these guiding principles. Again, these are not mutually exclusive and should be applied to all instances of working in fragile contexts. So when we talk about do not harm, okay, so this is an assessment and programming method, okay, it includes practice-oriented tools, so for analyzing the effects of specific international cooperation interventions on a conflict situation and generating options for modifying the intervention towards conflict sensitivity. It has its role in humanitarian aid. So the do not harm principle analyzes whether project's element unintentionally support factor contributing to tensions called dividers or support factors reducing conflict called connectors. For example, building a water well in a community without prior consultation with the beneficiary may have unintended consequences that could lead to frustrations and exacerbate conflict dynamics. Now, if I talk now about if we now move to the conflict analysis, it's actually the systematic study of the profile, the cause, the actors, and dynamics of the conflict. Conflict analysis provides a snapshot of the context to an organization, thereby providing an idea of what type of intervention fits in well with those settings. It also helps development, humanitarian, and peace-building organizations gain a better understanding of the context in which they work and their role in that context. For example, conflict analysis is actually can be like an iterative process which should be woven into a project's life cycle during the project's inception, implementation, and actually also the monitoring phases. Moving now to the conflict sensitivities. In practice, that means we need to understand the conflict context. We need to understand the interaction between our intervention and the conflict context. And also we need to develop options, programs, and management objectives that reduce the intervention's negative impact and strengthen its positive effect in relationship to various conflict dynamics. So in short, it means that realizing that your work could have potentially negative and positive effect on your operating context and using a conflict sensitive lens to mitigate them. As an example, improving transportation, for example, infrastructure in certain contexts could make a community more vulnerable to attacks. The same action, where it is carefully implemented using a conflict sensitive lens, could help build bridges, that actually promote peace and foster economic development and a more resilient society for the benefit of the community. So using a conflict sensitive lens coupled with smart project investment could improve the ability of a community to defend itself, be defended by public security forces, or avoid conflict altogether. So we'll move to the next slide, which also talks about the key operation of the guiding principle. If you look at the 2014-2019 strategy, the strategy that we are implementing, actually, this strategy ended in 2019, but it was actually extended until December 2021, while we finalized the broad consultation for the new strategy. So that strategy has 3 areas of emphasis. So we mean that it's like strengthen state capacity and establish effective institutions. The second one is promote resilient societies through inclusive and equitable access to employment, basic services, and share benefit for natural resources endowment. And the third one is enhance the bank group's leadership role in policy dialogue, partnership, and advocacy around issues of fragility. So moreover, in line with the regional approach recommended by the high-level panel on fragile state, the 2014-2019 Banks Group strategy is guided by 4 principles of engagement. So we move from fragile state, from the concept of fragile state to that of fragile situation. There is a need for us to stay engaged so that we can build long-term resilience. We need to apply responsiveness, selectivities, and also have tailored solutions to our interventions. And the fourth one is to actually build strategic alliances and have country ownership, which is in line with the principle agreed under the New Deal for engagement with fragile states. In terms of the modus operandi, the strategy also calls for the fragility lens to be applied across all aspects of the bank group's operational engagement. So if I now move to the next slide, which talks about the institutionalization of the fragility agenda. The banks, like Ivory mentioned earlier, has a long history for understanding and integrating fragility consideration in its program and operation. As you can see on slide 6, if we look at the background here, it is critical to emphasize that the bank group has been one of the first multilateral organizations to institutionalize a fragility agenda as part of its business model. The creation of a dedicated organizational unit, the establishment of the post-conflict country facility that was then called the PCCF in ADF 10, then the fragile state facility in ADF 11 and the Transition Support Facility, which is now called the TSF, under ADF 13. Those were all critical milestones, which empower the bank group with resources and instruments supporting the implementation of its fragility agenda. Analytical tools, financial innovations, and successive adjustment of the resources allocation framework that we have put in place over the last 5 ADF cycles also allowed to channel increased volume of resources to transitional state and shape the fund's operational engagement toward addressing national and regional drivers of fragility on the continent. Of course, the road travel and these operational toolkits were grounded in 2 successive frameworks, namely the 2008 Strategy for Enhanced Engagement in Fragile States and the 2014 Strategy for Addressing Fragility and Building Resilience. So the current fragility, the 2014 strategy, is actually underpinned by lessons learned from the implementation of the 2008 strategy. The 2012 independent evaluation of BDEF, of the assistance of the bank, to fragile state, because that's what was called then fragile state, and the recommendation from the high-level panel on fragile states. So the strategy is also grounded on the bank's group's 10-year strategy, which draws on other institutional strategies, such as the governance action plan, the private sector development strategy, the gender strategy, or the human capital development strategies. So the strategy actually refined the conceptualization of fragility and introduced changes in the bank group's processes, financing modalities, and internal management for its support. Now, in compliance with the ADF 15 policy commitment, the bank group is embarking on the preparation of the 3rd strategy on fragility and is engaged on a holistic review of the ADF allocation and operation framework through an in-depth consultation process to ensure a coherence with the long-term strategic trajectory of our fragility agenda. If you look at the slide 7 now, it actually tells us, when we talk about fragility, what it is really, how does fragility come about. You can actually say a state, the level of fragility of a state is measured by 2 factors: the pressure that the state received and the capacity of the state to face those pressure. Put it in this way, we can clearly see that there is no state that is immune from fragility, because all states in the world face some kind of pressure, and all states also have some kind of capacity to actually overcome those pressure. It's actually the level of capacity to overcome the pressure that it faces that makes the country resilient, or more resilient, or less resilient. So when we actually developed the CRFA, which is the Country Resilience Fragility Assessment Tools, to actually measure our own fragility, we came up with the 7 key dimensions that could actually help us to capture the various drivers of fragility across all the development critical sector. Now, when we talk about country eligible for the TSF, all the ADF countries, we have 20 countries that are eligible for Pillar 1 of the TSF. Those countries, as you can see, are those in green, whereas we have Djibouti eligible only for TSF Pillar 3. We are currently working, as you know, the eligibility is determined by the, as you can see on the left and on the right there. When you have a CPIA score, you have to have an harmonized list of the CPIA score that is 3.2 or lower, or if there is a presence of peace building or peacekeeping mission within the past 3 years in your country. That is actually what the MDBs community use. And the bank has actually added, based on the experience on the ground, a 3rd element, which is the qualitative assessment, because we can have countries that have a high CPI score and that never had any peacekeeping or peace building mission on their ground, yet are really confronted to serious element of fragility. So this qualitative assessment help us to support this country, make the assessment, determine their eligibility, and bring them the resources needed to avoid them actually being dropped into the fragility list. That exercise is actually being done for Burkina Faso, for example, a country that's actually going through some very security challenges. And we know that the impact of the security expenditure are having on the development side of the country. Now, in the next slide, we can talk about the the high-level guiding principle, and these are all well and good, but what do they mean in practice when we talk about, all these guiding principles? So central to the implementation of the Bank Group strategy approach for addressing fragility and building resilience in Africa is the systematic application of the fragility lens either in lending or non-lending activities of the bank. This will actually help us to identify, to respond to, and prevent fragility, and at the end, to build resilience. So the fragility lens application refers to the use of analytics, including the quantitative findings of the CRFA, which assesses and monitors the drivers and manifestation of fragility, their interaction, and most importantly, the political economy behind the various changes, as well as operationally relevant recommendations for the role of the bank's intervention. Furthermore, the underlying principle of the fragility lens is to mainstream fragility consideration and identify entry point for building resilience in the bank's country and regional integration strategy documents, such as the CSPs, the risk, as well as its operational programming, such as the PCN or the PAR. So analyzing the fragility lens encompasses a three-step approach. And those three steps are, you have to assess the fragility, mainstream the fragility, which is like the application lens, and now implement it, which is where we actually go on the ground and make sure that the recommendation from the fragility report are being taken into account. On the next slide, we are going to go quickly on the level of engagement. So we are talking about the application of fragility lens, first of all, at policy and analytical levels, which this involves the use of normative frameworks, which calls for a comprehensive, coordinated, and inclusive approach. And such an approach enables us to understand, prevent, respond to, and transform fragility. Now, at the organizational level, when we apply the fragility lens, there is an improved understanding and promotion of system, policies, procedures, and internal cultures that will promote working in a way that is fragility and conflict sensitive. It also calls for leadership, resources, and organizational capacity to adapt to new and often more risky way of working. Now, when we talk about the application lens at the programming level, this actually indicates ensuring that projects and activities are geared to work on fragility in a responsive and proactive way. The fragility lens is applied to all aspects of our work. And now at the individual level, applying the fragility lens means including people who have competencies to work effectively and responsively in dynamics and often volatile situations. Staff might need training and support to consider how they can apply fragility lens, to their work. And another prerequisite is the presence of personal ownership and commitment to developing, competencies to address fragility. Now, when we talk about the fragility at the level of the bank, this is actually a bank-wide activity, and that's what the slide number 11 is telling us. Whether you are a country economist, whether you are a agriculture expert, energy expert, or a fragility specialist, you just have to be part of the team. And it's important that you understand the 3 steps of the application of fragility lens. Like we talk about the how we have to assess it, we have to mainstream it, and we have to engage, implement, and adapt the fragility. On slide 12 now, when we know that we have all these challenges, and for us to address these challenges and build resilience, there is a need for us to actually have the resources. And so to address and build resilience in member countries, the bank has at its disposal a wide range of resources: the statutory resources, ADF, ADB, NTF, and the non-statutory ones that we can call the bilateral or the thematic trust fund, the special fund, or even the dedicated facilities. You know, and these windows can actually provide non-concessional financing, you know, either in loan or in grant, you know, to support the implementation of projects and programs, you know, program-based operations, line of credit, sovereign equity participation. We have guarantee instrument, technical assistance program, capacity building program, you know, project preparation, or even area clearance. Now, on this slide number 13, we have the specific, you know, ADF instrument, which actually we call the TSF, the Transition Support Facility. I'm just going to introduce this, and Valerie will take over to get to, you know, to deep dive into this very important instrument. So as you know, the TSF is structured around 3 funding pillars. We have pillar 1, which provides supplemental support to eligible countries beyond their PBA allocation. And this support actually helps accelerate their transition toward greater resilience across a range of socioeconomic sectors. We also have pillar 2. Pillar 2 actually provides grant resources to assist in the clearance of arrears of eligible countries. And by doing so, it enables those countries to gain access to broader debt relief and to normalize relations with the bank and the international community, and thereby to again be able to eligible for development financing resources. We then have pillar 3, which provides targeted technical assistance that is catalytic and enable transition state to build requisite institutional capacity for the effective utilization and management of lending and programmatic support. It also supports policy dialogue and reform. So at this point, I'm just going to pass the floor to Valerie so that she can actually bring us to, you know, the details of the TSF. Over to you, Valerie. Thank you.
Perfect. Emile, thank you very much for that. Okay, well, I just want to be sure everybody can hear me correctly.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm mindful of the time as well. I want to leave some time for questions. We're now at about 12:30, and I'll try and go quickly through the rest of the slides. This particular slide, I simply wanted to show that since we've had set-asides for TSF, that the ADF 15 was in fact the largest set-aside that we received. And so again, it's a testament to the importance of the instrument, as well as to the importance of fragility as a topic for the donors. Next slide, please. And next slide as well. Here I want to talk about just in terms of when we speak of TSF and what it does. Here are 3 examples of the concrete impact that TSF has had. The first in the Horn of Africa, in Eritrea, with a climate change vulnerability project, where, as you know, climate change is very important to Africa. And as a country or as a region that has the least amount of emissions, unfortunately, Africa suffers a great deal from climate change. So I think it's not only important in terms of the region that it works in, but also the area that TSF was able to provide support to. Central African Republic, as you know, which is a country that has had its share of issues. We also were able to provide funding to help that particular country. And then Cote d'Ivoire, I think, is a very important story, because Cote d'Ivoire is one of those countries that was, of course, eligible for transition states facility, and then sort of graduated outside of TSF, and is now actually raising funding on the Eurobond market. And so when you talk about assistance from TSF, there is, of course, the willingness to go from being eligible for TSF resources to moving sort of out of that. Now, of course, the flip side is that countries can also fall back into fragility, and the TSF is there to help countries at whatever stage of their development that they may be. Next slide, please. So trying to follow along on my own thing. So in terms of key results achieved, because this is actually quite important as well, we as in MDB need to be able to tell the story of what happens to the resources once a project is approved. Essentially, where does the money go to, the resources, where does the support go to? And here I think it's really important, because the TSF has been able to show, for example, that during the period 2011-2019, the TSF contributed towards providing access to new electricity connections for about 450,000 people, benefited over 7 million people from improvements in agriculture, and provided financial services to about 120,000 SMEs. Next slide, please. Again, here we talk about Cote d'Ivoire, and I think it's just important to understand the role of Cote d'Ivoire as a regional powerhouse right now in West Africa. US clearance was provided by the ADF in 2010. Technical assistance was provided for debt management. And Cote d'Ivoire is one of those countries that actually benefited from the 3 pillars. So the first pillar, which is additional resources to the PBA. Second pillar, which is arrears clearance, and third pillar, which is targeted assistance. Very important, I think, success story for us to tell. Next slide, please. Here, I'm actually going to skip this slide. I'll let you look at it when you get the presentation. And I think I might be getting close to, close to the end of my own slides. Emile, I'm supposed to go to 21. Before I finish up, though, and hand you back the baton, I wanted to talk about arrears clearance. So arrears clearance is actually very important in the sense that a country cannot really fully access the resources that it has with the institution, nor have normalized relationships with ourselves as well as the other MDBs if you're in arrears. And arrears simply means that you owe money to the institution. And we have a fairly stringent criteria. It's 30 days after an amount is due. Sorry, on the slides, please go back to the recent successes, arrears clearance, slide number 20. And so once you fall into arrears, it's difficult, as I said, to have normalized relations with the institution. Now, Somalia and Sudan arrears clearance. Somalia was done last year. Sudan was actually recently, I want to say back in March, that arrears clearance were done. And I think this shows the importance of the TSF as an instrument. In the first instance, we're able to accept bridge financing from the UK for both operations. And essentially what that means is that since we have a prohibition against paying back ourselves, the ADF resources is used to pay back ADB debt, and ADB resources are used to pay back ADF resources. So essentially you're paying different sides of the house. We received, in the case of Sudan, targeted resources from Sweden and Ireland to contribute to clearance of those arrears. And it allowed both countries to finally reach a big decision point, the most recent being Sudan, actually of last week. And so I can't stress enough the importance of TSF to arrears clearance. So currently, we only have Zimbabwe as the only country left in arrears. And that country has been in arrears, I think, for quite some time. But the Pillar 2 will be able to receive additional contributions because right now there isn't sufficient funding to clear all of Zimbabwe's arrears. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it back to Emile to finish up and for us to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, hello, thank you, Valerie. After all this, presentation, we've seen the challenges, but we've also seen the opportunities. What is the way forward from now? Where do we go from here? So here we are working towards a set of activities that are going to, just increase and actually strengthen the operation that we've been doing so far. We are looking now at how to actually include, prevention, more prevention in our intervention. We are looking at how to address regional fragility more efficiently. In this regard, we can take the example of, let's say, the Horn of Africa, Valerie was talking about it earlier. We have the Horn of Africa, the insecurity in Sahel and in the Lake Chad Basin, some competition for resource and cross-border challenges in Mano River Union. So we will address this through building resilience as a regional public good. For example, in Mano River Union, road infrastructure project enhance economic connection between border communities to strengthen regional integration and promote peace and security. We try to harness regional integration opportunities to support small and fragmented economies. One newcomer that is a very welcome one, the AFCA, which is the African Free Trade Continental Agreement. And also we have to build more partnership to address regional pressures. This includes, undertaking joint assessments with other institutions, identifying area of complementarities with other institutions, given that, we cannot, address fragility issues alone. Some institutions have their own area of competitive advantage. So we want to capitalize on that. In the, we can see now that in the, all of this is kind of being built into the new strategy that we are developing. And as you can see, this is actually the framework of that new strategy. We have the priority areas, the key enablers, the activities that are planned, what are the outputs that we expect from that, what are the outcomes, and what will be the ultimate impact, which is actually just to have fewer regions or countries and actually subnational areas instead of fragility. So I'm going to stop there, and I would like again to thank everyone for your understanding, and we look forward to your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Emile, very much. So we would invite participants now to submit their questions on the Q&A directly, and we will do our best to answer all of them. So who's going to be the first to throw their hat into the ring? We'll give you all a couple of minutes. Excuse me. So, all right, let's see who's provided one. Emile, can you also see the question?
Okay.
Okay. May I read the first question?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a question from Susan Pandey. The regional operations has a new financing framework. How is TSF leveraging this, or will leverage this to support regional activities, initiatives?
Yeah. Yes, like we said, the regional operations are one of the key elements because we want to look at fragility, look at the regional aspect of fragility. Because when you try to address fragility using the burst view, it means that you are not only focusing on a single country, you are actually getting a broader view. And that's why the strategy has in place some very important element, like you can actually leverage resources from the regional framework. I think there is a ratio of is it 1 to 1.5 or 1 to, I think it's 1.5. For the resources that you use, for the TSF, you can actually go and get more resources on the regional envelope, and that actually gives you more resources to make bigger impact. So that's one of the one element that we can use, to try to get that impact at the regional level. I also want to mention that I have my colleagues of the of RDTS who are connected, and don't be surprised if some of them really want actually to answer or actually strengthen some of these responses. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from Mr. Ibrahim Bangura. Are there any success stories besides Ivory Coast for countries that have transitioned from fragile situation to resilience using the bank's 3 instruments?
Well, at this point, I think we can say, yeah, Côte d'Ivoire was a success story. And I would say the way that we use the instrument today, we have not clearly used the harmonized list the way it should be to get into ADF 15. Because as you know, when we talk about the harmonized list, it means that it's a list that is used by the bank, but also by the World Bank. And because the World Bank developed their first ever strategy for fragility, they had a different eligibility framework. And we were actually in the process of actually developing our third strategy, so we could not harmonize our work on that specific area. So the deputy just recommended that we should bring back in ADF 15 the countries that we had under ADF 14. So we do not have the time now to see, okay, which are the countries from ADF 15, who can actually graduate. I'm sure if we have done that, it's possible that we might have had more countries that, that have graduated.
Thank you. A question from May Mwaka. Okay, she says, once again, thanks for this brown bag session. Thank you. Very informative. One question to you all is, what are some of the key lessons, takeaways from the independent evaluation of the last fragility strategy, and how are you addressing it in the new strategy?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the key elements that was mentioned by the BDEF evaluation was the need for us to bring in that prevention lens. It's always good to, prevent than to try to heal. So that element is actually important for us to in a new strategy. The other element that we had from the BDEF was the fact that the area of emphasis in which we are intervening are still relevant. The one that we have under ADF 14 are still relevant. So if you look at the area of special emphasis that we have now, we have basically, there were 3, we have basically brought back 2 of them, and then we are emphasizing on the 3rd one so that our actions are more efficient. So at least those 2, I mean, I'm not, there are some other, lessons that were have been brought into the new strategy, but those 2 are very key, and we are trying to make sure that, they are taken on board in the new strategy.
Okay, thank you. Anton Sune, another question. So thank you very much for the good presentation. Within the project themselves, what is your assessment of the effectiveness of the M&E system put in place? It seems the projects I have looked at effectively report at output level, but have challenges to effectively report on high-level outcomes and impacts within localized settings.
Yeah, okay. Now, when we go to, at project level, this is where we have to make sure that the mainstreaming of fragility, it's a very important element. We always encourage, the project team to include fragility expert at the very onset, even at the concept level. That's where you want to get the fragility expert so that he can bring in all these conflict sensitivity, all these fragility lens elements, and make recommendation on the kind of activities that can be actually implemented. Now, once you will always notice that in every project, there is a requirement to have a fragility note. That fragility note, not only do we have to make sure that the project document itself, it has some element of fragility in it, but we also have to have that important annex, fragility note, which made some kind of overview of the challenges, but also emphasize the various activities that are required to make sure that the community, the most vulnerable, are also accounted for. Now, at the level of measuring the outcome, the impact, this is when we go for supervision mission. At supervision, that's where we can actually make sure that the recommendations that have been made are actually being followed. And that's when we say they are being followed, is just to make sure that they were taken into account in the implementation of, they have been taken into account in the implementation of the project. So that's very, very critical.
Okay, thank you. A question from Abu Fal. How is COVID-19 impacting the fragility lens approach and assessment of the bank? How will COVID impact the operations of TSF?
Well, as we know, COVID has had a very negative impact on all aspects of the development, not only development, even our own personal aspect, the way we are doing business today. And COVID has actually just laid open, like just exposed what a fragility assessment could have done earlier. Or if you look at all the report, the fragility assessment report, there is always a mention of the need for us to make sure that the social the social net actually is actually taken into account. We need to make sure that at the social level, the community is also protected. The health system, we just don't want to wait until we have this kind of crisis. We had Ebola before, and maybe Ebola actually helped us to manage this crisis better. We don't know. But again, yes, COVID-19 is actually helping us also in reviewing the way that we are not only assessing our fragility on the ground, but also how we are building resilience, how we are making the community and the most vulnerable more resilient to this kind of challenges. Will COVID actually impact operation of TSF? It's not only at the level of TSF, it's actually at the level of the bank, because we need to not only use the TSF to make sure that we are strengthening our communities, but also use all the resources available to make sure that, at the health level or any other level, social level, the population feels a bit safe, that they can actually confront these kind of challenges in the future, before it actually becomes a serious matter.
Okay, thank you, Emil. I don't see any more questions. Okay, a new one has come. Okay, so just a comment to support the importance of the fragility assessment report, even for NSO operations, as it has helped in some cases in informing the design of technical assistance around some projects in a way that enhances the project contribution in addressing key drivers of fragility. This was the case with the bank's pioneering NSO intervention in Sudan. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks for the comment. Yeah.
If I could also just go back to the question about, are there any other countries that are success stories besides Cote d'Ivoire? So if I had to bet for another country that could be touted as a success story, I think I would probably put my bet on Sudan. So of course, Sudan has its challenges. However, Sudan used to be an agricultural powerhouse, and the private sector in Sudan. So we've invested a lot in the ag sector in Sudan. And if they're able to get the private sector back working, if they're able to export products such as wheat and the like, I think that they'd really be quite the story. So we hope that they keep on the right track, and hopefully they will, come out on top again in a couple of years. Thank you. There are a couple more questions, Fatma, in the Q&A.
Yes. Okay. So Susan Pandey, will the new selectivity framework, i.e. strategic priority areas, apply to TSF eligible countries?
Yeah, thanks, Susan, for the question. Of course, I think for TSF eligible country, this is even more, because as you know, in these countries, everything is basically urgent. It's like everything was needed yesterday. So, and with the limited resources that we have, it's actually very important that we try to be as selective as possible, while also ensuring that we don't leave any other aspect behind. Yeah, the selectivity framework is definitely very important for us in terms of making sure that, while we are limited in the resources available, we are also making sure that the very critical element of challenges of the country, of the regions, are really catered for in our intervention. Thank you.
Okay. A question from Clement Mensa. Regarding the TSF window 3, how are prospective projects selected? Is there a specific modality for selecting projects?
Yeah, as you know, we launched the TSF Pillar 3 call for proposal early this year, and these projects, the proposal were made, and yes, we have some clear modality for selecting those projects, and the modalities are actually included in the operational guidelines. We have 5 of them, and when we launch the call for proposals, we also highlight the 5 elements that are required, because those proposals are going to be assessed based on those 5 requirements. And, it gives the opportunity to those who are designing the operations to make sure that, the 5 elements are included in their proposals. Yes, it's a very long process, but it's also actually helped because, as you know, the resources also are limited, and we are trying to make sure that there is some kind of, every country is also able to use the TSF Pillar 3, which is actually a very important pillar, because that's where we have the, we can strengthen the institutions. We can actually enable the environment, the business environment for more sustained operations. So the Pillar 3 is very important. Yes, we have some specific criteria, and those criteria are actually disclosed during the call for proposal.
Okay, this is a question from Collins. Is there any ceiling amount for project financing under each of the pillars?
Well, as you know, let's say for pillar 1, each country has its own allocation for pillar 1, so they can use it, as they see fit. One of the flexibility that the TSF pillar 1 offers, that you can actually use your resources upfront. You are not bound by the rule of the PBA, which says, okay, there's a certain percentage for the first year and so on. But for the TSF pillar 1, you can use your resources upfront, and your resources is the amount of whatever allocation you've received. For pillar 2, as you know, there are specific countries that are eligible to a pool of resources that are put there, and it's actually on the first come, first served basis. But as Valerie mentioned earlier, we only have Zimbabwe remaining now, and I believe that the pillar 2 windows will probably need to be replenished again if we want to do anything for Zimbabwe. But I don't have the exact balance right now, but yes, pillar 2 is a pool that is used to clear areas. Now for pillar 3, we have a general pools, under ADF 15, 100 million UA, and we go by call for proposal, but we can also use some kind of specific theme, decided by either the director of RDTS in consultation with the RDs and ISDs to, get some specific programs that can be, implemented through the TSF pillar 3.
Okay, I think there is one last question for the session from Mamadi Soare. How can we increase? Yes, how can we increase the allocations of countries like the CAR? Everyone knows that their needs are huge while we only receive minimum allocations.
Well, as you know, the allocations CARS is receiving the PBA as well as the TSF. I don't have the current amount of the TSF for CAR, but there is a very fair formula that is used to allocate resources. It's not just a random allocation that we do. No, firm is actually well placed maybe to answer this question.
Yes, and thanks very much, Mamidi, for the question. Central African Republic is one of those countries that has the minimum allocation, which is actually 15 million UA, the minimum PBA, I should say. So regardless of what the amount is, it could be 5, it could be 6, because on performance-based, the minimum level of contribution has been raised to 15 million. Then it also contributes, or excuse me, not contributes, but also receives an equal amount under the TSF as what we call sort of a top up under Pillar 1. And so, yes, while it does receive the minimum allocation, I think it's important to note, it then receives another allocation under the TSF because of its fragile situation. A country like CAR, I think one of the things that really it has to try to do is apply for complementary resources and apply through things such as project preparation facilities, co-financing, trust funds to really leverage the amount that it can have. I believe as well that the portfolio is quite small given the situation. And so you could never, for example, go from this allocation to having 100 million UA allocation for CAR. Simply the absorptive capacity isn't there. But I think what should be kept in mind is, what do we do with the resources that we have in order to prepare the country to be able to receive funding? So the public financial framework, technical assistance for debt management, all of the things that must really accompany a country as it's then able to receive resources for particular projects. Of course, the other window, which is important, is the non-sovereign window. I don't believe that CAR has any NSOs. I stand to be corrected, Mamadi, on that. But again, it's another source of funding which is should be available to countries that have small resources in terms of PBAs. Thank you very much.
Okay. There are more questions, Valerie?
All right, so let's do this. I'm just doing a time check. There are 2 questions. let's do
Yes.
this. Oh, sorry, one was a response from Amity that the portfolio is not too small. Okay, fantastic. So I think that's a good thing. So it means that it can have, it can receive more resources, but we're happy to speak to you, Mamadi, bilaterally on that. Let's take one last question from Kaz. Kaz, good to read you. Let's go ahead. Let me just read this out. Thanks for the informative session. Kindly provide your advice if there are some grants available to support NSOs, for example, in the area of feasibility study market assessment to enable potential private sector projects to be more bankable. Other instruments such as concessional funding will also be useful. Necessary processes, if any, instruments available for NSOs. Okay, so it's essentially regarding project preparation for NSOs. So Kaz, there are a number of thematic trust funds that do provide project preparation to support NSOs. SAFA is one of them, but of course you need to be within the climate space. The project preparation facility as well, the ADF project preparation facility has been revamped now and can provide resources to support PPPs. And so if there's an element of course, the sovereign in a PPP for eventually a private sector or some operation, that can be done. But also happy to speak to you about other types of support. The TSF itself does provide targeted assistance as well under Pillar 3. Emile will correct me, but some of that assistance can also be in relation to studies and project preparation as well. So happy to have a conversation bilaterally, Kaz, about what we can do to support NSOs. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We've come to the end of our session. We will send around. So Fatma, first of all, thank you very much. To our staff as well for all the technical support. We couldn't do this without you all. We look forward to seeing you in September when we will restart the brown bag sessions. The presentation will be sent around. If there are follow-up questions that haven't been able to be answered or something which is unclear, please do reach out to myself or to Emile. One of the things I'm actually going to ask everybody to do is, as we go into our midterm review for ADF 15, which is going to be in November, most likely the second half of November, one of the things that's really important to do is to show impact about ADF particular projects. And so if any of you are on the call and you've got projects which can show the benefits, particularly of ADF, even better for TSF, please do reach out to us with those. One of the things, of course, that is key in research mobilization is showing what you've done well in order to receive more resources. And you know that we are quite keen to show the impact that the ADF has had, and to also be able to sell, if you will, the stories, but and to support a case for greater resources for ADF countries. So we count on you to do that. We also count on you, please, for the uptake of the PPF, the Project Preparation Facility, which had a set aside, of UA 75 million under ADF 15. There is a dedicated PPF secretariat. So please, any questions that you have about using this particular resource, you can send the email directly to PPF Secretariat. We'll be more than happy to respond to those. Thanks a ton. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Stay well and see you back in September. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.